the late 2000s, a surge of retrowave music had begun hitting the scene, harkening back to the synths of 80s style electronic music. From what you'd hear on the radio to the dance floors illuminated by colourful lights, it was a vibrant, outgoing time period that was also filled with paranoia, confusion, excitement, and eventually hope for a better future. The nostalgic feeling of the 80s would make a return in the guise of what I had just said, retrowave music, spearheaded by artists such as Kavinsky, Mitch Murder, College, and a few others. Around this same time, a few pieces of media would also take the same feeling and apply it in the forms of other media. In 2011, Drive came out as a film that created this blend of drama, action, and tension, laced with 80s inspired music. A film that would seem generic on a surface level, left a huge impact for the retrowave or outrun genre that would spring to life not too long afterward. In 2012, Devolver Digital, Donation Games, and Abstraction would release not only one of the most iconic indie games of all time, but one that is dear to my heart and could possibly be my favorite indie game ever, Hotline Miami. Hotline Miami is a top-down action game that sets itself in an alternate version of late 80s Miami, where you play as a character only known as Jacket, someone who is made in a very similar fashion to the driver in Drive. The game starts you off with a tutorial as to how to play the game. And once that's out of the way, you're then shown a weird conversation between you and several people wearing masks. Afterwards, you begin receiving phone calls in your apartment, giving you an address to go along with a mask to wear, as if it was a job opportunity, so to speak, which is a farce because before you know it, you're pitted in a room full of bad guys that want to kill you. And this becomes the crux of the game. You get a call, with the details being different each time, but the results end up being the same. You go in there, you kill everyone, and then you leave. And you pretty much repeat this ad nauseum without your character wondering why any of this is happening. But you as the player can make the connections from here on out. You'll begin noticing subtle details after each level, from what your character is like, his hobbies, the appearance of the apartment over time, and how the psychological aspects start bleeding into the game itself. Its story is both interesting and also really unnerving at the same time, once you find out what's actually going on much later on. But the main hook of this game comes in two aspects, which I think are its strongest points. First of all, the gameplay. Now before I go any further, I will mention again that there will be spoilers ahead, so if you haven't played the game yet, I'd stop watching right now and go grab it. Moving on. Hotline Miami is a very hard game. You will often be frustrated at times when you make the wrong plays, or when your aim and reflexes aren't on point, and that is because of the lethal nature of the gameplay. You can kill enemies in one hit, using a variety of melee weapons and guns, or your fists if you want to make things more difficult than they already are. But the enemies are just as devastating as you are, often killing you in one hit, making the playing field even, unless you're fighting the big guys which require a gun, and dogs which require any weapon available. Each level has them in different positions, whether they're patrolling or staying on guard, they're ready for you, and you need to be ready as well. Their reflexes are incredibly fast. I've had many instances where they've shot me before I could even blink, which means that this is a very fast-paced game, where you need a plan for each stage to kill as efficiently as quickly as possible. As a reward for good game sense and gameplay, you can rack up combos as you kill in quick succession, as well as switching up your weapon variety too. When everyone is dead, you're then instructed to leave the area and return to your car, which afterwards your results are shown. The levels are highly replayable for several reasons. The variety of masks that you have available to you as you unlock them either through high scores or by discovering them within the level. They mix up the game in a lot of interesting ways. They have great designs and add nice touches to the violent and brutality of Hotline Miami, adding an animalistic element to the game. You also have a shit ton of weapons to power through, from shotguns, pistols, assault rifles, machine guns, knives, swords, hammers, bats, pull sticks, clubs, pipes, crowbars, and much more. And each time you go through the levels, you unlock more of them, adding more options to your arsenal. Guns have finite ammo though, and to replenish ammo, you have to find the same weapon. Melee is risky, but also rewarding, especially the knife, which is broken because of how fast it hits and the fact that you can kill by throwing, which most of the other weapons can't do, unless you pick a particular mask that lets you do it. The enemy variety is rather lackluster. You're usually fighting the same guys in white suits, dogs, big guys in other suits, but given the context of the game's story, it makes sense. They do offer a fair and difficult challenge, and at times they can be really punishing, especially when you have the wrong weapon in an even worse situation. The dogs are really fast and require that you get rid of them quickly once they're on your tail. There are, however, a few bosses that switch up the fight a fair amount. The fight with a character called Biker, who is someone you get to play as once you've completed the main story. Speaking of which, his playstyle is more limited, fashioning a cleaver and nothing else. And going back to the story for a moment, his perspective changes pretty much everything, which can only be discovered through the means of finding letters, which are purple square icons that are hard to see. But with the owl mask, it's easier to see. When you assemble the puzzle and go to the epilogue level, you'll see what I mean. Then you have the Molotov van and the showdown level with the leader of the mob. There are some levels, however, that switch things up. One where you end up in a hospital, which to be honest is the most annoying level in the game, acting as a stealth mission with annoying movements. And then the level Assault, where you massacre an entire police station. But the gameplay loop is so good, finely tuned and challenging that you'll ignore the limited variety of enemies and oftentimes stupid fast reflexes of certain enemies. The gameplay is the main reason I come back to Hotline Miami on occasion. The second reason is the soundtrack. This game embraces the rising trend of 80s retrowave music, bringing in a number of different artists to bring their contributions to the table. They all complement the respective levels they've been assigned to, and nothing really feels out of place. You could even play other synth music and it would have the same effect. What's there is memorable, creating an atmospheric layer into this violent yet vibrant version of late 80s Miami. Soundtracks that are assembled as compilations rather than compositions can often be hard to nail. Having a bottomless pit of songs to choose and making sure that it fits the mood can be rather difficult in itself. But Hotline Miami's soundtrack is both consistent and just as finely tuned as the gameplay that it enhances. When all is said and done, the creators behind Hotline Miami had created a masterpiece of an indie title, one that is both really difficult but also fair, on top of an interesting story with a hidden layer of secrets and depth as you uncover them. Highly replayable gameplay with scores to beat, masks and weapons to obtain, and a really cool aesthetic that is pretty much the cherry on top. A few years later, they would do a sequel to this game that was bigger and even more expansive than the first one, but I'll do a separate video for that one at some point. You can pick this game up fairly cheap across multiple platforms, but if you prefer more relaxing and casual games, then I would not recommend this game. Otherwise, pick it up and play. It's incredible. Thank you for watching.